Thank you. We will now proceed with the division on Amendment 149, and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Marie Todd.
Sorry, Presiding Officer, I'd have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Todd. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Angus Robertson.
Voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Robertson. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 149 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 63, no 52. There were 4 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. We now turn to Group 7 on assessments, including support of terminally ill adults. I call Amendment 150 in the name of Brian Whittle, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. I remind members that if Amendment 161 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 162, which was previously debated in Group 2 on eligibility to be provided with assistance, and that if Amendment 125, previously debated in Group 5 on training, qualifications and experience of health professionals, is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 301 by way of preemption. I call on Brian Whittle to move Amendment 150 and to speak to other amendments of the Group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'll start with, I'll move Amendment 150 in my name, but I'll start with Amendment 22, which is a tidying amendment. The concern here is those accessing assisted dying should be provided with all options of support, including social care and palliative care. 34 add a reference to social care assessment to the medical practitioner statement under Section 8. 34A adds reference to a palliative care assessment to a medical practitioner statement under Section 8 in relation to Bob Doris's Amendment 23, which introduces requirement to assess palliative care. 78 adds reference a social care assessment to the medical practitioner statement to Schedule 2, and 78A add reference a palliative care assessment to the medical practitioner statement under Schedule 2, again in relation to Bob Doris's Amendment 23. 83 adds reference a social care assessment to the medical practitioner's statement to Schedule 3. 83A adds a reference a palliative care assessment to the medical practitioner's statement under Schedule 3, and again in relation to Bob Doris's Amendment 23. At one stage of drafting, the amendments read social care or palliative care, and I would like to place my thanks on record to Liam MacArthur to moving forward social care and palliative care. Both serve different needs. Both should be assessed in their own rights. In 150 and 304, the concern was that assisted dying becomes a preferred option to patients because of a lack of palliative care. What 150 does is allows for Scottish ministers to define minimum standards of palliative care for those accessing assisted dying. 304 is consequential. Having engaged with the third sector on this amendment and understand they are hesitant and it may become a barrier to access of palliative care, but access to an acceptable level of deliverable palliative care is an important consideration of this bill. During Stage 2, I drafted this amendment to include that plan. It should be costly to make a point about deliverability. Following feedback about workability, I have removed this requirement. 105 addresses the concern that medical professionals' opinions must be truly independent of one another. In 155, limitations of notes to the independent practitioner to ensure that the independent practitioner is making their assessment on the exact same evidence as was available to the coordinating practitioner at the point of request. The independent practitioner cannot have consulted with the coordinating medical practitioner on the case, except for referral, or have access to the notes by the coordinating medical practitioner regarding the assisted dying request beyond the date that the assisted dying request is made. At stage 2, feedback from the committee was that this amendment needed to be clear, that this amendment only restricts information about the person's wishes to access assisted dying, not their entire medical record, as we recognise those that are terminally ill can have rapidly changing healthcare needs and concerns. I have tidied up this amendment to read, has not been provided with any other notes prepared by the coordinated registered medical practitioner regarding the person's request to be provided with the assistance to the end of their life since the date of that first declaration for that reason. 193 is consequential to 174, requires that the statement from an independent assessor was recorded in an adult's medicals record. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I now call on Bob Doris to speak to Amendment 23 and other amendments in the group. Mr Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My amendments in this group are in 3 main areas. Firstly, with regards to palliative care. Secondly, with regards to the current set out in a practitioner's report. And thirdly, on registered medical practitioner's discretion. There are 5 amendments on palliative care, amendments 23, 165, 166, 167 and 168. Let me turn first to Amendment 23. This bill contains a requirement as it stands for the registered medical practitioner to ascertain whether the appropriate social care has been provided to or offered by any person seeking assisted dying. Amendment 23 requires the same registered medical practitioner also ascertains whether appropriate palliative care has been offered or provided to that person. This offers a consistency of approach and urge members to support it. Amendments 165 and 166 dictate circumstances where the registered medical practitioner must refer to a palliative care specialist. 165 requires such a referral where the appropriate palliative care has not been offered or provided to the person, and 166 requires such a referral when the person's reasons for seeking assisted dying are that they have uncontrolled symptoms or fears of such symptoms, something particularly important to palliative care specialists. Both are very clear-cut examples as to when the input of a palliative care specialist can and could make a substantive difference to ensuring the person seeking assisted dying has all the support required to make an informed decision on assisted dying relevant to their circumstances. In the experience of specialist palliative care practitioners, people with a life-shortening condition who express a wish to shorten their life because of distressing physical or psychological symptoms, including common fears, often change their minds. They often go on to enjoy valuable time once these symptoms have been explored, understood and addressed through appropriate palliative care. Indeed, such people will often say later they are glad they did not end their life. It is not reasonable or safe to assume that someone making a first declaration to seek assisted dying has already received appropriate palliative care. In fact, a wish to hasten death may be an indication of a lack of appropriate palliative care. My Amendment 167 ensures that if a person chooses not to have such a specialist palliative assessment, refusal in itself would not make them ineligible for assisted dying. The person's autonomy is therefore respected. Amendment 168 allows the registered medical practitioner carrying out the assisted dying assessment to take into account, if they wish, a refusal to attend a palliative care assessment in their decision-making. Together, these amendments aim to ensure that no one is pursuing an assisted death without having first received appropriate palliative care, and more specifically ensure that someone is not pursuing an assisted death because they are in agony which can be treated or because they have fears which can be allayed. My second set of amendments in this group creates a requirement for a medical practitioner's report to be compiled, setting out how any assessment has been reached, documenting what evidence was gathered used to inform their decision and judgment, and the reasons the practitioners reached their judgment. Without this, the bill contains what in reality are tick box forms for recording the outcomes of an assessment. The information to be contained in the report would not be recorded anywhere else under the provisions currently within this bill. My Amendment 37 would therefore establish a provision for registered medical practitioner reports and with it capture such important information. The evidence and reasoning behind each assisted dying decision would be clear. The medical practitioner's report would also provide relevant information in case of complaints. It may be a source of protection actually for practitioners where there is absolutely no wrongdoing. The report will also be an important source to inform understanding of the Act and its operation, should it pass in any review. It is surely only right that in something as significant as assisted dying, a report is prepared and not simply a tick box pro forma. Amendments 38, 39, 40 and 67 are all consequential to 37. 38 ensures that if a request for assisted dying is cancelled, there is no need to prepare such a report. 39 and 40 ensures that the person's GP will provide with the medical practitioner's report and it will be added to medical records. And Amendment 67 adds the report to the regulation making provisions within the bill for the Scottish Government. Finally, Presiding Officer, my last set of amendments in this group aim to add consistency to the discussions a registered medical practitioner has with any person seeking an assisted death. Matters of diagnosis, prognosis, treatments available, palliative, hospice and other care options and the nature of the substance provided to a person to be explained and discussed with them can be discussed insofar as the registered medical practitioner considers appropriate. In reality, that could mean no conversation at all. Amendment 28 would ensure a conversation had to take place. Amendment 32 would ensure that the registered medical practitioner must advise the person seeking an assisted death to inform their own registered medical practitioner they are seeking an assisted death. They would also advise them to discuss the request with someone close to them. Quite a lengthy explanation of 3 separate sets of amendments in my group. The only thing I'd like to add is I'm fully supportive of what Brian Whittles has said earlier on and in amendments in Fulton McGregor's name, which we'll hear from shortly.
Thank you, Mr Doris. I now call on Daniel Johnson to speak to Amendment 153 and other amendments in the group. Mr Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. So far in Stage 3, there has been much discussion about the safeguards that may be provided for this bill. But in reality, what that boils down to is the judgment of 2 doctors. And that may well be the right way to proceed, but I think we need to be clear about that the opinion of the coordinating medical practitioner and the independent medical practitioner is the safeguard. And yes, that is subject to guidance, to training, and indeed consultation with other professionals as set out in other amendments, but ultimately it is their decision. Therefore, I think we need to think very carefully both about how that judgment is arrived at, in what context, making sure that it is robust and evidenced and accountable. And most critically, what happens if those opinions are that the person is not eligible for assisted dying? And these are the subject of my amendments in this section. Amendment 153 ensures that a medical practitioner makes the assessment in person and meets the person more than one occasion in order to do so. At Stage 2, I brought forward, I'll give in a moment, an amendment which sought to specify how long the doctor had known the patient. Now that was a probing amendment because what I was seeking to establish was that you need a good relationship between doctor and patient in order for that opinion to be arrived at. I think as a bare minimum, we need 2 consultations and in person for that judgment to be arrived at. Happy to give way to Brian.
Brian Whittle.
Very grateful to Daniel Johnson. I think we're in agreement with this. I think this was raised yesterday. The importance of that doctor-patient relationship is unique, and that my concern here is that more and more that doctor-patient relationship is becoming more distant, in that we don't see the same doctor over and over. And you must meet them in person. I mean, we have to meet them face to face, because you have to be able to see look somebody in the eye to gauge their feelings and gauge their emotions. I wonder if the member would agree.
Daniel Johnson.
I completely agree. I think what is really important is that we establish that there is good understanding, and that can't be done in a perfunctory way. I think it needs to be done in person. What we don't want is this to be something that is decided upon after very short interactions. These need to be quality interactions. On Amendment 9, and I would pay tribute to Bob Doris, because I think he is quite right, and I would urge all members to look at Schedule 2. Because this is, I will give way in a moment, this is, in a sense, the device that will evidence the opinion of the coordinating medical practitioner, and all that is required is for the details of the medical practitioner and indeed the individual, and a line to specify the condition a line deleted and a signature and a date at the bottom. And I think, given the gravity of the decision, I don't think that in and of itself is sufficient. I'm happy to go away to Christine Graham.
Christine Graham.
I thank the member. It really is just a commentary on something Mr Whittle has raised and yourself regarding face-to-face patient-doctor relationship. I would surmise, I don't know if the member would agree with me, that once you're diagnosed with a terminal illness, that will become much more personal, much more face-to-face, and not the 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock phone call and offline. And so I think that that has to be addressed, that there will be much more relationship, in many cases, between the GP and the patient once that diagnosis has been confirmed.
Daniel Johnson.
I would agree with that, and I think also the nature and indeed sometimes the intensity of that will produce a very good quality relationship, which is why I actually, and I reflect this as at stage 2, the length of time actually is not a good proxy for that, because sometimes a short but intense relationship between doctor and patient is actually much more valuable than a long but cursory one. But coming on to my Amendment 9, I reflected on some of the discussion at stage 2 between the member in charge and Bob Doris. And while I think there's much merit in his amendments for the requirement for a report, I do worry that it may be burdensome, that full addition of report, especially given sometimes I think the very sensitive timing of this. But what I think is required is at the very least a statement of what's required. So this is what Amendments 9, 183 and 183A address. In particular, but just a more particular point, though, is also this, is that it needs to be recorded when a medical practitioner does not agree that it should proceed. And this is what Amendment 9 does. Now, that needs to be recorded, and this is what Amendment 9 would record, is that if that is the assessment, that a statement is recorded and provided to the patient. That will also be important, because I think if subsequently that decision is reversed, that original decision needs to be referred to, and it explained why, by a subsequent medical practitioner, but why they have arrived at a different opinion. Now, given the nature of the drafting, the structure that comes in through 183A. But I think it is important that this bill provides not just for what happens when this is a decision to proceed, but also what happens when the decision is that this should not proceed. And indeed, these amendments are modelled on what exists within the New Zealand legislation, where there is a clear specification around what happens if the coordinating medical practitioner decides that the person is not eligible or that should not proceed. Finally, Amendment 183 specifies that in addition to the form set out in Schedule 2, that further details need to be given in the form of an additional statement that must be recorded. What is required is both the nature of the relationship of the patient and the doctor, the understanding of the doctor about the nature of their condition, but also in terms of the steps and the understanding that the coordinating medical practitioner has of the person's ability to both have capacity and undertake these things, which I think it is important to evidence those things, have them as a matter of record, so that we have clarity, robust evidence and accountable decision-making on what is ultimately an incredibly important decision that both the patient and the doctor are making. Happy to give way to Bob Doris.
Thank you, Daniel Johnson, for giving away. Daniel Johnson made reference to my Amendment 37 for the medical practitioner's report, which appeared to be supportive of, but had a concern it could be overly burdensome or bureaucratic. Can I reassure Daniel Johnson that Amendment 67 allows the details of that report to be laid out in regulations by the Scottish Government to make sure it is not so? So hope on reflection he'll be supportive of 37 and the consequential amendments within that group, because it is really important, surely, to have a rationale for the decision arrived at by the coordinating medical practitioner.
Daniel Johnson.
Well, indeed, I just believe my amendment would require that rationale, but rather than a full report is in the form of a statement, which I think, just having reflected on the debate at stage 2, I think provides the robustness that's required, but also I think the clarity. I think leaving things to regulations always slightly concerns me when I think actually we can have the clarity. Although I am very supportive if my amendments don't pass, I would be supportive of Mr Doris's. But I think very happy to.
Ross Greer.
I'm very grateful to him for taking the intervention. Just on his Amendment 9, the statement of dissatisfaction, can I just confirm where that statement would be recorded? Would it go into the patient's medical records? And if so, if I could, via this intervention, encourage the Cabinet Secretary, if Amendment 9 is passed, to commit to putting that in the guidance, because I'm not. I agree with the purpose of this amendment. I'm not entirely clear from the amendment where that statement would then go, in which record it would be put. I presume it would be the patient's medical record, but I think it would be useful to confirm that, certainly to confirm that that's the intention.
Daniel Johnson.
That very much is the intent. I think it is an oversight in drafting that it doesn't say so explicitly. That was my intention when I gave the instruction, and it is unfortunate. And indeed, I too would be grateful if that could be clarified in guidance, because I think it should be recorded in a patient's medical records. But above all, I would just say this to Parliament in closing, is I think this bill does set out what should happen if the decision is to proceed. I do think we need to think very carefully about whether or not this bill has sufficient clarity about what happens when the decision is not to proceed. And I think if people are so minded, I think at the very least, I think some of the provisions in these amendments have merit and should be agreed to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I now call on Douglas Ross to speak to Amendment 154 and other amendments of the group. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Amendment 154 in my name seeks to strengthen the assessment process by ensuring that registered medical practitioners fully discuss the range of palliative care options with anyone making a declaration. This includes symptom management, pain relief, psychological and social support and end-of-life planning. Crucially, it also requires that the patient understands these options and that the discussion is formally recorded. At its core, this amendment is about choice, real choice. As the bill currently stands, a doctor could proceed with assessing eligibility for assisted suicide without guaranteeing that the person fully understands or has access to the care that could relieve their suffering. That is simply not acceptable. Without ensuring that palliative care is funded and accessible, we risk presenting people with a false choice between unbearable suffering and ending their life prematurely. True autonomy can only exist when people are able to access the care that they need, regardless of circumstance. We know from palliative care specialists that suffering at the end of life can very often be alleviated with expert support. Pain management, psychological care and holistic support can significantly reduce the desire for an assisted death. And that is why it's essential that discussions about these options are comprehensive, understood by the patient and formally recorded. This not only strengthens informed decision-making, but ensures that there is a clear safeguard that palliative care was fully considered before any assisted death is pursued. If this legislation is to be genuinely about choice, it must guarantee that every person knows and has access to the full spectrum of palliative care. Without that guarantee, I fear this bill risks turning what should be a well-supported, fully informed decision into a coerced or coerced by circumstance one. Amendment 154 is a small but I believe crucial step to ensure that patients are not left facing a false choice and that the promise of autonomy is matched by real, accessible care. And for these reasons, Presiding Officer, I hope members can support Amendment 154. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call on Paul O'Kane to speak to Amendment 157 and other amendments in the group. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I don't intend to detain the Chamber for long in terms of the broader issues and themes that surround this amendment, because many of them were made in the proceedings last evening when we were discussing the important role that social work should play within this process and multidisciplinary approaches indeed. Current wording states that a registered medical practitioner carrying out an assessment must consider making inquiries of a healthcare professional, social care professional or social work professional with with qualifications in or experience of a matter relevant to the person being assessed. This amendment would instead make it a requirement for a registered medical practitioner carrying out an assessment to make inquiries of at least one health professional, social care professional or social work professional who holds a qualification or has demonstrable experience relevant to the condition, care needs or circumstances of the person being assessed. So I think at a very basic level, my amendment seeks to strengthen the assessment process by replacing what is a discretionary power in the bill as amended with a mandatory requirement. And I think that would ensure that assessments are being informed by appropriate multidisciplinary expertise, will promote greater consistency in practice and reduce the risk that relevant safeguarding or welfare considerations might be overlooked. And I lay this amendment because of all of the issues that I have raised and the need for expert professionals to be part of the assessment process of individuals who, of course, may demonstrate certain vulnerabilities. And with that, Deputy Presiding Officer, I will hand back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I now call Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 26 and other amendments of the group. Mr MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by again reminding the Chamber of my declaration of interest in the support I receive from various groups in relation to this bill. Unlike Mr O'Kane, I'm not sure I can offer a reassurance I won't detain the Chamber for a little bit of time given the number of amendments in this group, but I will do my best. In terms of my own amendments in this group, Amendment 26 reflects the fact that the drafting of Section 71ZC is not quite right, as it requires the assessing doctors to, quote, inquire about and discuss an adult's reasons for wishing to be provided with assistance to die. This could be read more widely than just asking the adult themselves, potentially requiring the assessing doctors to investigate more widely. I don't think that was the intention or would be appropriate, and the amendment adjusts the wording to make that intent clear. Amendments 79, 81, 85 then ensure that, where known, those reasons are recorded in the relevant schedules. Amendment 29 makes it clear for the avoidance of doubt that once the second declaration has been signed, it's up to the terminally ill person to decide whether to ask for the substance to be provided to them and when. Amendments 30 and 31 are technical in consequence of amendments made at stage 2. Section 71B sets out the information a registered medical practitioner must provide to the person during an assessment. At stage 2, a requirement was added to inform the person they may request a social work assessment, but it referred to a subsection that wasn't agreed to, and Amendment 31 removes the incorrect cross-reference. Amendment 30 is technical, seeking to maintain consistency in terminology when referring to social work professionals in the bill. Brian Whittle's amendments 150 and 304 would mean that a terminally ill adult who has made a first declaration may request to be provided with a palliative care support plan with minimum requirements to be set out in regulation. I've always been clear that it is not a case of either or between palliative care and assisted dying, as international evidence clearly supports. I support these amendments. Marie McNair, yes.
Marie McNair.
Would Mr MacArthur acknowledge that without first-rate palliative care, the bill does not offer terminally ill people a real choice? I know from my own experience, seeing people come into the hospice, they're in extreme pain and distress, wishing to be put out their misery, and within a few days the pain was under control, their quality of life had improved dramatically, and wishing to live again. Why does this bill not take away every step to ensure that people have the opportunity to have not just a discussion but a guarantee access to such care?
Liam MacArthur.
I think the bill does safeguard that. The discussions that would need to take place with the individual that's requesting the choice of an assisted death would have to include discussions of palliative and other care options. I think those discussions, as we see in other jurisdictions that have introduced laws of this kind, demonstrates an improved engagement with palliative care that isn't there at the moment. I see no reason why that cannot be the case here. I worked with Brian Whittle on amendments 22, 34, 34A, not at the moment, Mr Mara, 34A, 78, 78A, 83 and 83A, and I thank him very much indeed for his constructive approach on these, and would encourage members to support them. Amendments 34A and 78A are consequential to Bob Doris's Amendment 23, which requires a doctor to be satisfied that any eligible patient must have been offered or provided with palliative care. The interaction with palliative care, as I've said, is extremely important, and so I support Amendment 23. Daniel Johnson's Amendment 150 153 would require the RMP carrying out the assessment under section 6.2 or the independent assessment under subsection 4 to have met the person who made the declaration on more than one occasion. Well, I would expect this to happen in the vast majority of cases, not least for the reasons that Christine Graham mentioned in her intervention. I'm concerned about removing discretion from doctors involved in making decisions appropriate to the circumstances of the individual. While there is obvious value in in-person consultations, mandating it in primary legislation reduces the flexibility that some terminally ill people may need for whatever reason. It would be more appropriate, I believe, for clinical practice guidance to strongly recommend face-to-face consultations and permit them only to be held virtually in exceptional circumstances and where appropriate. Turning to Douglas Ross's Amendment 154, I fully support terminally ill people having access to appropriate advice and support about palliative care, and I'm sympathetic with the aim of this amendment. Briefly, yeah.
Just to return a moment to what he said there about in exceptional circumstances, remote consultations taking place. Obviously, the concern with that is that the practitioner cannot see who is out of view of the camera. That's where concerns about coercion, etc., come in. I was wondering if you could detail about how that can be mitigated against, because that's an issue where I'm really torn. My default position is that I do think these should be in person, because I'm just not clear how you can manage that in mitigation.
Liam MacArthur.
I think that's a very valid concern. As I say, I would expect this to happen in the vast majority of instances, but as I think Christine Graham amplified in her intervention earlier, there are likely to be many occasions in which those conversations are taking place. There may be instances where the medical professional feels that it is appropriate for a remote consultation to take place, but the notion that there would be no interaction face-to-face with the patient seems to me a vanishingly small possibility. But I think capturing that in the clinical guidance is probably more appropriate than putting it on the face of the bill. As I say, it would be reasonable, I believe, for clinical practice guidance to strongly recommend face-to-face consultations and permit them only virtually where appropriate and exceptional circumstances. Turning to Douglas Ross's Amendment 154, I fully support the terminally ill people having access to appropriate advice and support about palliative care, and I'm sympathetic to the aim of the amendment. However, in the bill as drafted, section 71A(3) requires any doctor undertaking an assessment to discuss and explain to the person any palliative, hospice and other care available, including symptom management and psychological support. They must also inform the person they can be referred for a palliative care assessment to explore whether any additional support could be provided to them, and must make a statement on this as per Schedule 2. As such, the bill already includes provision to ensure that there is explanation and discussion about palliative care available, as well as a referral for an assessment. Doctors already keep records as a matter of practice and in accordance with requirements, but while not persuaded the amendment is necessary due to the bill's other provisions, I'm content to accept that should Parliament consider it necessary and helpful. Brian Whittle's Amendment 155 adds that the independent RMP cannot consult with the coordinating RMP on the case and has not been provided with access to any notes prepared by the coordinating doctor. There is a risk that this amendment could be counterproductive. In practice, the coordinating doctor may record concerns or contextual information in the patient's notes that highlight important aspects of the person's condition. These notes can help the independent doctor make a fully informed assessment. Preventing them from consulting the coordinating doctor's notes could mean that crucial context is missed, and I give way to Brian Whittle.
Brian Whittle.
MacArthur, I'm very grateful to Liam MacArthur for taking the intervention, and we have discussed this at length. I think my concern here is that we're asking two independent medical practitioners, who we would assume have a higher level of expertise, to come to the same conclusion with the same set of medical conditions. I think that to me it ensures that one can't influence the other, and I think that's why I brought forward these amendments.
Liam MacArthur.
Brian Whittle rightly observes that this is a conversation that we had at some length at stage 2 as well, and I understand the sentiment behind it, ensuring that there is an independent process being undertaken. But for the reasons I've suggested, I think denying the ability of the independent doctor access to those notes isn't necessarily in the interests of the patients. I think are safeguarded as things stand under clinical practice. Paula Kane's Amendment 157 makes it mandatory for doctors to make inquiries with at least one health, social care and social work professional with experience directly relevant to the person's condition, rather than just having to consider it. The section as drafted already requires that, where considered appropriate, the assessing doctor makes inquiries of health professionals who have recently provided care to the person. They will know the person and have an understanding of their circumstances, enriching some assessments. I'm confident the provisions in the bill will ensure that appropriate inquiries are made with experienced professionals, whilst allowing for the exercise of professional judgment, and therefore I do not support this amendment. On Bob Doris's amendment, I will take an intervention.
Paul O'Kane.
I'm grateful for Mr MacArthur giving way. He seems to accept the sort of broad concept that this is an important innovation in terms of how we understand all of the circumstances that surround a person's life and their decision. I just wonder why he feels it shouldn't be mandatory, because I think if we've got kind of nothing to worry about and we're agreed in terms of it being a positive thing, then surely, as a matter of course, it can be done. And if there are no concerns, that would be identified quickly, and the person could then move on.
Liam MacArthur.
As Paula Kane and I discussed in exchanges yesterday, I think I would fully admit it at this stage that the bill as introduced to Parliament, one of the obvious admissions was recognising the importance of the involvement of social work and social care in some of the assessments we're requiring of medical professionals. Where I have a concern is we seem to be lurching from either banning things or making them mandatory, and I think it crowds out the ability to exercise medical judgment of those who have the experience, the training and the qualifications to exercise that judgment. On Bob Doris's amendments 28 and 32, while the provisions in the bill were drafted with the aim of centring the professional judgment of medical practitioners, I appreciate the additional safeguard these amendments look to provide, and I'm content therefore to support 28 and 32. My concern with Amendments 161 and 163 in Stephen Kerr's name is that mandating special assessments in every case removes the ability for doctors to take into account individual circumstances, including where there is no clear basis for referral. The effect of these amendments would be to add unnecessary burden to many applicants for whom there is no doubt as to their terminal illness or capacity, and as such there is no additional safeguard. International evidence, again, doesn't support that, and I don't support these amendments. In terms of Jackie Bailey's Amendment 164, I'm wholly sympathetic to the aim of ensuring we safeguard young adults in this situation, as well as those with diagnoses which are fluctuating in nature. I also appreciate Jackie Bailey's approach in allowing for flexibility, which relies on professional judgment in terms of the degree of involvement from psychiatry and social work professionals to support assessments. This is proportionate, especially given the extremely low numbers likely to be involved, and I'm content to support Amendment 164. Similarly, I'm inclined to support Bob Doris's Amendments 165 to 168, which require a specialist palliative care referral in instances where a patient has not been offered or provided care, or are motivated by the prospect of uncontrolled symptoms. The amendments also allow a patient to decline such a referral without being denied access to assisted dying, which strikes, I think, a reasonable balance. On Miles Briggs' Amendment 169, while my bill already requires assessing doctors to inform the person that they may be referred for a social work assessment, the inclusion of this requirement in relation to mental health services would add an additional safeguard, and one I believe is both sensible and welcome. On Amendment 170 and related consequentials 300 and 301, I recognise the important role that social work and mental health services play in the value that they can add in the various circumstances listed in the amendment, and of ensuring protections are in place for young adults. I'm also conscious, though, that the regulating power in relation to practitioner training may raise some of the same concerns over training provisions in the bill, which are dealt with under the Section 1, or should be dealt with under the Section 104 order. The Scottish Government raises deliverability and potential equalities issues on the basis of a difference of treatment of age, on the basis of age, in addition to raising issues of legislative competence. In light of that, and despite very much accepting the principle, I would ask Mr Briggs not to press and Parliament not to support 170. On Fulton McGregor's Amendment 171 and consequential 306, protecting vulnerable adults is of the utmost importance. So again, I am very sympathetic to the aims here. However, the bill already includes clear and strong safeguards to ensure voluntariness and capacity, with 2 independent medical assessments, specific checks for coercion and referrals to a psychiatrist if they are in any doubt as to somebody's capacity. The bill will put in place a legal framework that exceeds what is in place to protect people making other end-of-life decisions. It allows assessing doctors to make inquiries and seek the views of health, social care and social work professionals and those who have provided or are providing care to the person as the health professional sees necessary, something Fulton McGregor rightly pressed for at stage 2, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And I take an intervention, Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Pam Duncan-Glancy. I thank the member for taking that intervention. And so how would the member address the fact that many of the professionals he's described in contributions, GPs, social workers and others, have said that they would find it difficult to make judgments about capacity and coercion within the structures that exist? How would the member address that?
Liam MacArthur.
I'm not sure that that is the evidence that the Health Committee heard throughout the Stage 1 process. I think, as I say, we see this system operating in other jurisdictions well. The capacity and coercion assessments that are being made routinely in relation to other types of medical treatment are the sorts of assessments that would be made here. I fully accept that there may be further training and ongoing training that we required. I think we touched on some of the issues yesterday in relation to coercion and our developing understanding around things like coercive and controlling behaviour. All of those things can be factored into the training that is already being provided. But as I say, I think this, I believe, is a more appropriate approach than a blanket requirement as proposed in Fulton McGregor's amendment. I'm also mindful of the Government's position that similar amendments at Stage 2 presented a deliverability challenge with legal and operational issues cutting across existing duties, which in turn could lead to duplication and potentially disproportionate intervention. With Audrey Nichols' Amendment 173, I consider that the existing reporting requirements in the bill are comprehensive, and this amendment would duplicate many of those. I can't support Alistair Allen's Amendments 176 and 179. The bill already requires multiple assessments, which in practice clinicians will normally conduct in person. As I said earlier, placing a rigid requirement in primary legislation assessments must be in person removes flexibility in circumstances where remote consultation may be clinically appropriate. Whilst again I would expect the vast majority of assessments to be in person, I'm cautious of adding an explicit requirement and thereby creating a potential barrier in a specific future case where more flexibility may be necessary and felt appropriate. As he and I both know and accept, given the constituencies we represent, decisions on when online consultations with patients is and is not appropriate is rightly left to medical judgment. Daniel Johnson's Amendment 9 requires that if the assessing doctor is not satisfied that a person seeking an assisted death is eligible or acting voluntarily, a statement is made to that effect and provided to the patient. Requiring practitioners... You may be preempting me, but I give way to Daniel Johnson.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member. I'm also very grateful to parliamentary staff for knowing our work better than we do. And I'd just like to point out that Amendment 194 and 195 would mean that the statements are recorded in line with other statements. So I'd actually done a more comprehensive job than I'd realised. So I hope that reassures members. And of course, I wouldn't want to mislead Parliament on such an important matter.
I'm grateful to Mr Johnson for raising that as an intervention on me, not a false point of order. Requiring practitioners to record and explain decisions where eligibility criteria are not met will also help patients understand the outcome of their assessment and the reasons for it, which is in line with patient-centred care. So I support Amendment 9 and consequential 194. I also support Daniel Johnson's Amendments 183 and 183A with consequentials 185 and 195, which add detail and require an additional statement concerning the relationship between the assessing doctors and the patient, as well as the rationale given if a doctor reaches a different conclusion on a patient's eligibility to a previous doctor. I can't support Jeremy Balfour's amendments 184 and 307, which would prevent a person assessed as ineligible from making another request for 12 months. Apart from anything else, this ignores the fact that a lot can change in an individual's disease or condition over such a period. I'm inclined to support Bob Doris's Amendments 37, 38, 39, 40, 60 and 67. These require a coordinating medical practitioner to produce a comprehensive report on the assessment, which will in turn facilitate extensive data gathering with Public Health Scotland. But I don't consider Stephen Kerr's Amendment 186 necessary. The bill already provides sufficiently for medical practitioners to seek advice or input from other professionals with relevant knowledge and expertise where they consider it appropriate. That, of course, is in addition to the existing expert knowledge of the assessing doctors themselves. Referral to relevant experts is already a well-established feature of clinical practice. Sue Webber's amendments 91 and 92 also add unnecessary barriers, in my opinion, by requiring further assessments after both doctors have undertaken independent assessments and confirmed they are satisfied the criteria have been met. Given the bill provides that at the point of witnessing the second declaration, the coordinating doctor must remain satisfied of the criteria set out in section 8(1), I see no purpose for the further requirement, which would simply be an obstacle rather than a meaningful safeguard. On Alistair Allen's Amendment 188, while there is value to the second declaration process being done in person, again mandating it in primary legislation reduces the flexibility that some terminally ill people may require. The bill requires the declaration to be witnessed, so this would remove telephone consultation, but may include video consultation. Again, robust clinical guidelines are the best way of safeguarding this part of the process, and I don't support Amendment 188. I'm content to support Jackie Bailey's Amendment 95, so that any information obtained from inquiries of social care, social work and health care professionals is shared with a person's GP and included in medical records. As regards Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 195, the bill already requires multiple independent assessments, and the process cannot proceed if a person is found ineligible. Clinicians are required by the bill to refer the person to a specialist if there are any doubts about the person's illness or capacity. Amendment 196 risks duplicating these safeguards, adding unnecessary complexity to an already robust process without changing the fact that if any of the clinicians involved have doubts about a person's illness or capacity, then that person is not eligible to proceed with an assisted death. I can't therefore support Amendment 196. Finally, Liz Smith's Amendment 197 on recording of cancelled declarations, while well-intentioned, seems unnecessary due to the existing professional standards. I'm also conscious that professional conduct matters and deciding on conduct breaches are within the GMC's remit, and that each regulatory body will have its own system for matters such as this, raising additionally the prospect here perhaps of legislative competence issues. As such, I think the very laudable intention of what Ms Smith is seeking to achieve can and will be met, so don't support Amendment 197. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 161 and other amendments in the group.
I think the interesting and perhaps liberating aspect of our deliberations yesterday and today and probably tomorrow is that we are speaking very much on the basis of our own positions. And I think that, as I say, is quite liberating. And I want to reflect on what I've just heard from Liam MacArthur in relation to his responses to many of the amendments that are offered in this group. And indeed, in reference to the exchange there was between Christine Graham and Daniel Johnson about the frequency with which a doctor might see a patient in a life-threatening situation. And I think the thing that strikes me is that there is an overriding assumption about everything. It's assumed that these things will happen. It's assumed that palliative care will be on offer to a patient in any given situation in any part of Scotland on an equal basis. And that just isn't the case. I will give way.
Liam MacArthur.
Thanks, Stephen Kerr, for giving way, and certainly echo his sentiments about the nature of the debate. Some may find it liberating, the whips may disagree. But in terms of the assumptions that are made, I would just point to the evidence that we can gather for the way in which these laws work in practice elsewhere. We may disagree about the principle, but you can look at the data gathering about who accesses it, with what conditions, for what reasons, and how the safeguards work in practice. These aren't assertions, they're drawing on the evidence.
Stephen Kerr.
I think that goes to the heart of the issue, actually, because when you look at the evidence, when you look at the case studies that are offered to us from other jurisdictions, it isn't quite as black and white as Liam MacArthur is making out. I think some of the generalisations that have been about the evidence that's been offered are not helpful in the consideration of the bill. And as I say, these assumptions, I think undermine the possibility of us making good law here, because they assume a homogeneous fairness about, for example, I come back to the issue that we've heard from another speaker in relation to one of the amendments on palliative care. It just doesn't exist equally for people across Scotland currently. And until that situation is remedied, I feel that we are in a very troubled set of waters.
Sue Webber.
Thank you. Mr Kerr, for taking that intervention. I'm looking back at some evidence I've heard elsewhere, and a report to the Westminster Health and Social Care Select Committee notes that the Cicely Saunders Institute of Palliative Care Policy and Rehabilitation at King's College pointed to examples of findings from Canada that palliative care resources were disproportionately consumed by MAID requests, while non-MAID patients had reduced access to palliative care. Does that sound fair to you, Mr Kerr?
Stephen Kerr.
Well, it doesn't, but it also creates those shades that I think that we should accept exist in terms of the evidence that's available to us from other jurisdictions. I give way to Rona Mackay.
Thank the member for giving way. The House of Commons' 14-month inquiry found no evidence of palliative or end-of-life care deteriorating following the introduction of assisted dying in other jurisdictions. No evidence, indeed observing it had often acted as a catalyst for improvement.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, there is the perfect illustration. We had an intervention from Sue Webber quoting academic research that suggests there is, and now we have an intervention to say there isn't. I mean, that, I think, in a sense, is the very issue that is at the heart of some of the assumptions and generalisations that we should be aware of. I give way to Michael Mara.
Michael Mara.
The member for giving way. I think certainly at stage one and also in our deliberations throughout this bill, there's been a general consensus that we want to see palliative care increased, access to it, as Mr Kerr is setting out. But would he agree with me that there is not a single line in the Scottish Spending Review that identifies further resource for palliative care, and there is no additional money in the budget we have just passed as a Parliament to expand palliative care? So whether it be these are the questions of the facts of availability of expansion is not going to happen.
Stephen Kerr.
Couldn't agree more with what Michael Mara has just said. And that's what I say. These are the troubled waters that I think that we're in. We're talking about a set of ideals that don't exist, and there are no plans to create this offer across Scotland on an equal basis. And until there is, I think consideration of measures such as this, I say, are fraught with moral difficulty, because until that situation arises, we're not giving people fair choices at all. And I think that's been reiterated by a number of the people who have spoken, not just in this group, but in the previous groups as well. But I do wish to refer now directly to my amendments in this group, because this group talks about the issue, again, that was raised earlier by Daniel Johnson in his remarks, about the fact that this is down fundamentally to two doctors' judgments. So we're talking about how do you request, how is a request for an assisted death assessed? And as the bill is written, a single registered medical practitioner may be required to make life and death assessments under Section 6. And we've heard the debate, the to and forth, on the very issue of whether this should be an in-person assessment, which I find quite frankly mind-blowing on something as vital as this, that we're not insisting. I think Ross Greer, for example, made a very timely intervention in relation to this matter. And that's why I, in a sense, have arrived at my amendments. Because referral to a specialist in the bill happens only if that practitioner believes there is doubt about eligibility or capacity. Now, that is a very heavy burden to place on any doctor. It is also a very thin safeguard for a decision of such consequence. And so Amendments 161 and 163 seek to correct that. They place discretion with clear requirements. And under these amendments, every person undergoing assessment would be referred to appropriately qualified specialists, one that could confirm the nature of the terminal illness. And I would remind members, as has been referred to previously, and I think this evidence should weigh on our minds, I refer to the words of Professor Scott Murray, Emeritus Professor at Palliative Care at the University of Edinburgh, who has pointed out that the accuracy of prognosis in such cases can be as low as 23%. Members will be familiar, I hope, with his column that appeared in the Times, where he warned that while those facing death cannot assess the high-quality palliative care, cannot access the high-quality palliative care they need, legislation of this type risks becoming, in his words, a simple and dangerous cost-saving measure. Those are very, very heavy words, very troubling words. So What these amendments do is refer the individual to appropriately qualified specialists. One would confirm the nature of the terminal illness. Another would examine questions of capacity where that is relevant. That matters because these situations are rarely straightforward. Prognosis can be uncertain, as I've just highlighted. Capacity can fluctuate. Depression can exist alongside serious illness. And the circumstances surrounding a request may involve pressures, certainly vulnerabilities. I can't imagine a more vulnerable individual than someone who has received a diagnosis with a terminal condition. And some of those vulnerabilities, by the way, may be added upon by things that are not immediately visible. So if the law is to permit assisted suicide at all, then the safeguards, we must have safeguards designed for the hardest cases, not the easiest and perhaps, and I hesitate to use this term, straightforward ones. When the law contemplates the ending of life, the protections around that decision must be stronger than our uncertainties, not weaker than them. Specialist scrutiny should not depend on whether a doctor happens to feel uncertain on a particular day. It should be part of a process from the beginning. And these amendments move the bill away from relying on a single practitioner's judgment and towards a process informed by specialist expertise and proper professional scrutiny. And this is what I took away as well from what I thought was an excellent contribution yesterday from Michael Matheson, who brought his experience in relation to another piece of legislation dealing with these matters, and I felt made a forceful contribution to our consideration of the whole issue. Give way. Yes.
Lorna Slater.
I'm very grateful for the member taking an intervention. Something the member said earlier in his contribution about the decision, the judgment resting with 2 doctors, as is currently proposed in the bill. What the member has not said in any point in his contribution is that the person whose judgment matters here is the patient. It is their choice to make. And as the member, and I know the member has good intentions, or I very much hope the member has good intentions, and is not attempting to just set an impossible bar that cannot be achieved. I hope that isn't the case. But what he is doing is moving the decision further and further away from the patient, when actually it is the patient's decision that we wish to enable, fully informed, fully consenting, but it is the patient's decision that is the important one.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, the patient, the issue of the patient and their well-being, welfare, is at the heart of these amendments. I'm a bit of a loss as to why some colleagues felt that was somehow a contribution that merited their applause, because frankly I'm not suggesting anything other than that we should be extremely careful in how we scrutinise this process, and that we view it as a process rather than 2 doctors with the heavy burden of making those decisions, because I just don't think that's fair on the doctors, frankly. And I certainly don't think it's fair on the patient, because I'm taking a holistic view to the nature of how an individual may or may reach a decision about requesting and applying for assisted suicide. So, Amendment 86 addresses a related concern, because at present the bill leaves doctors largely on their own when carrying out these assessments, yet the questions they may face can be extraordinarily difficult. They may involve concerns about mental health, the possibility of coercion, or complex family circumstances. In Amendment 186 would establish an independent panel of experts to provide guidance in these situations. The panel would include expertise in psychiatry, palliative care and safeguarding. And where there are doubts about capacity, mental health concerns or the possibility of coercion or undue influence, the case must be referred to that panel. And that is deliberate in answer to Lorna Slater's intervention, because I want us to keep our eyes firmly on the patient and the concerns of the patient. and pressure on vulnerable people is not always obvious. A person may speak about autonomy while quietly feeling that they have become a burden. These arguments are being rehearsed over and over in this debate because they should concern us. Someone may appear calm while experiencing treatable depression. And these are human realities that clinicians encounter every day. For decisions of this magnitude, it is not reasonable to leave a single doctor to carry out that responsibility alone. Some will point out that establishing such a panel comes with a cost, and that is true. But when the stakes involve human life, the cost of proper oversight is not an optional luxury. It is part of legislating responsibly. And taken together, these amendments do not simply add procedural detail. They address a fundamental weakness in the bill as it stands. They introduce specialist scrutiny, independent advice, clearer safeguards, where the current draft relies too heavily on individual judgment. And I repeat again my concern about the nature of many of the assumptions that we're making. For a decision like this, that cannot be reversed, the Parliament should insist on nothing less.
Thank you. I now call on Jackie Bailey to speak to Amendment 164 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I want to specifically concentrate on two amendments and start with Amendment 164, which I've tabled on behalf of CHAS, which is the Children's Hospice Association of Scotland. This amendment focuses on ensuring young people under 25 with complex or unstable conditions receive specialist multidisciplinary input during assisted dying assessments. This protection is needed because we know that young people with serious conditions often have enhanced safeguarding needs. We know their capacity can fluctuate, communication methods may vary, and decisions may involve significant family or social dynamics. So access to specialist psychiatry and social work ensures that risks are fully explored and fully addressed. So given that context, the amendment requires doctors to involve psychiatry and social work professionals when assessing young adults under 25 who have an unpredictable or fluctuating condition. That will mean there is appropriate and essential multidisciplinary support and specialist input for young adults under 25, and it provides a consistent national approach to ensure the vulnerabilities of young adults are not overlooked. So I commend this amendment to Parliament. Can I move on to the second amendment I wish to speak to in Group 7, which is... I forget the number of the amendment. It will come to me, 95, I think. Amendment 95 on behalf of the RCN Scotland. That's the Royal College of Nursing. Sections 7(1)(ZA) and (ZB) provide that a registered medical practitioner carrying out an assessment under Section 6 must make or consider making inquiries of professionals who are involved in the individual's care or who have relevant expertise. The RCN agree that the doctor responsible for making the assessment should be able to draw on the expertise and experience of the multidisciplinary team. However, what they're calling for is a provision to be added to the bill to ensure that these inquiries are properly recorded. They believe that this is important should the results of the assessment be challenged or scrutinised at some point in the future. So Amendment 95 introduces a new section after Section 12, which would apply where such inquiries have been made of other health, social care or social work professionals. Information would need to be recorded on what inquiries were made, the name and profession of the person who was asked, and a summary of the information provided by that person. This information would be recorded in the adult's medical records, which aligns with the requirement for patient declarations and medical practitioners' statements to be recorded in an individual's medical records. And I see Bob Doris wants to intervene.
Bob Doris.
I thank Jackie Bailey for taking the intervention. I'm very sympathetic to the amendment. I'm listening with interest. When listening with this information having to be captured but also written down would seem to persuade me even more that my amendment, I think, is 37 for the establishment of a medical practitioner's report, where all of this is captured in the one place and then put into medical records, is even more important. Would Jackie Bailey agree?
Jackie Bailey.
Absolutely would, but I would also make the comment that this section has a huge number of amendments, and I think it is a measure of the concern that we absolutely get this right. And it's not just your amendment that I think is worthy of support. The RCN themselves have noted that there is overlap with Amendment 173, lodged by Audrey Nicholl, which requires a registered medical practitioner carrying out an assessment under Section 6 to prepare and retain a written record. Now, whilst Amendment 173 requires all inquiries made under Section 71ZA and ZB to be recorded, it doesn't require a summary of the information provided by other professionals to be recorded. So the RCN's position and mine is to ask MSPs to support both Amendments 95 and Audrey Nicholl's 173. And I welcome very much Liam MacArthur's support for the amendments that I've addressed. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. I call Miles Briggs to speak to Amendment 169 and other amendments in the
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And like Jackie Bailey, I've worked with children's hospices across Scotland to bring forward Amendments 169, 170, 300 and 301. And these amendments ensure that anyone being assessed for assisted dying is made aware that support is available, including social work or mental health services. They strengthen protections for under-25s by making certain referrals automatic, including a requirement to refer anyone under 25 for social work or mental health support if any of the following indicators are present, including concerns about capacity, fluctuating or unpredictable diagnosis, safeguarding issues, communication needs, multiple disadvantage or limited or no social support. These amendments also allow ministers to set additional rules about the training and qualifications needed for practitioners making these referrals following consultation with relevant professional bodies. And in conclusion, these amendments will ensure that Parliament can set clear regulations that support safe, consistent and referral processes for young adults under the age of 25. And importantly, this maintains, I believe, coherence across the bill, ensures no gaps as well in ministerial powers. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Fulton McGregor to speak to Amendment 171 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I refer to my register of interest where I'm registered with the Scottish Social Services Council. I'll focus and keep my remarks to my amendments 171 and 306, not least to stay on the good side of the business manager. And I want to place on record my thanks to the Scottish Association of Social Workers, who have been pivotal in bringing these amendments to fruition. Colleagues, by supporting my Amendment 171, it would ensure that social work services are included as a statutory safeguard within the assessment process for assisted dying. Whatever view members hold on assisted dying across this chamber, we all share a duty to ensure that the safeguards within this bill meet the essential minimum required to protect those who may be vulnerable. Where a decision is irreversible, our safeguards must be beyond question. Now, Scotland has already had a strong, carefully constructed legal framework designed to protect adults who may be vulnerable due to incapacity, mental ill health, abuse or coercion. The Adults with Incapacity Scotland Act, the Mental Health Care and Treatment Scotland Act and the Adult Support Protection Scotland Act 2007 are all key pieces of legislation that form the backbone of Scotland's safeguarding system. Yes.
Kate Forbes.
I just wanted to commend Fulton McGregor on his amendments, but obviously social workers are more versed in spotting coercion. We heard from Michael Matheson yesterday just about that long-term relationship being critical. And so does he feel, as I think he does from his amendments, that involving social workers will inevitably mean that safeguarding issues are more quickly identified than with some healthcare professionals that might only be meeting with somebody for a shorter period of time?
Fulton McGregor.
Yeah, I thank the Deputy First Minister for that intervention. I'm going to come on to that point. In relation to the acts I'd mentioned just there, these acts were designed to precisely ensure that when decisions carry profound consequences, they are made with proper scrutiny, appropriate expertise and a full understanding of a person's circumstances. Yet, as currently drafted, this bill risks bypassing the very safeguarding structures that Parliament has already put in place. Medical practitioners are, of course, central to the assisted dying process. No one is doubting that. But I don't think they can be expected to assess alone the complex issues of social risk, coercion or safeguarding that may shape a person's decision. These factors are social, relational and often deeply contextual. Social workers and safeguarding professionals hold that expertise in identifying coercion, undue influence, domestic abuse, financial exploitation and situations where individuals may feel pressure. These pressures may be from others, from circumstances or even from the self-belief that they are a burden. Local authorities also hold statutory duties and records that may be directly relevant to an assessment of a person's capacity and vulnerability. Without consultation, medical practitioners will simply not have access to this information. Members should consider what this could mean in practice. A person seeking assisted dying may already be subject to safeguarding inquiries, capacity assessments or protective measures under existing law. If the coordinating medical practitioner is not mandated to consult the local authority, those safeguards may theoretically remain unknown, and that cannot be considered safe. Stage 2 amendments recognise the importance of multidisciplinary input by allowing referral to social services, and I note the member in charge, whose engagement on these matters I really welcome, has stated his belief that this discretionary inclusion of social services is a proportionate measure, but I have to disagree. I do not believe that leaving such a referral solely to the judgment of the coordinating medical practitioner resolves the problem. Medical practitioners cannot reasonably be expected to determine whether social work input is required if they do not have the information or the training needed to identify safeguarding risks in the first place. And evidence from jurisdictions examining similar legislation increasingly highlights the need for multidisciplinary assessment. The recent review by the Jersey Assisted Dying Citizens Jury and Review Panel concluded that clinicians alone cannot always identify coercion, safeguarding dynamics or complex capacity issues without input from professionals with expertise in social care and safeguarding. Now, I know this chamber had a lengthy debate yesterday on the very existence of coercion. We heard a whole range of views on the prevalence of coercion or the potential for coercion in other jurisdictions. And I think whatever side of this argument you may be on, we must try to avoid a confirmation bias. Whether that is that coercion is not an issue or indeed that it is a problem that cannot be overcome. The fact here is, if practitioners don't have the tools and resources to identify coercion, it's self-evidently going to be very difficult to confirm that it's taking place at all. As we all know, coercion itself is rarely obvious. It may not present as overt force or threat. It may appear through subtle family dynamics, emotional dependency, financial pressure, or, as mentioned earlier, internalised belief that one's life has become a burden. Indeed, coercion can be systemic. Societal narratives about the cost of care, the strain on families, or the value of independence can shape a person's decision in ways that are deeply powerful and extremely difficult to detect in a purely clinical assessment. For this reason, I believe that safeguarding against coercion requires multidisciplinary scrutiny. My amendment would establish a simple but essential safeguard, which is a duty for the coordinating medical practitioner to consult the local authority and ensure that relevant information about safeguarding, capacity assessments or existing statutory processes are taken into account. If you do not think that coercion is a major issue, this amendment will give added peace of mind to those who believe it does. If you are concerned about the cost of such a proposal, this would amount in most cases to a simple background check. If it finds nothing, then there would be no need for further social service involvement. If it finds something, then doesn't that make the proposal worthwhile? Isn't that what we are trying here to identify? This may lead to arguments also about resource implications. However, I want members to note that SASWA, Social Work Scotland and the SSC all welcome these amendments. In fact, they are insisting that we vote for these amendments today, which I'll come back to. They welcome the additional work as minimal as it would be, as they believe, like I do, our primary decision here should be based on safety and not on finance. Another argument is around autonomy and whether someone would wish for a social work referral. I do not believe this amendment impedes on a person's autonomy, as a person's choice can only be truly autonomous if it is made free from coercion, free from hidden pressures and with full understanding of their circumstances. Ensuring consultation with social work services allows medical practitioners to make decisions with the fullest possible picture. It strengthens the integrity of the process. Yeah, of course.
Emma Harper.
Thank you very much, Fulton McGregor, for giving way. Yesterday in this chamber it was discussed that coercion education in Western Australia took 5 minutes and a couple of PowerPoint slides. And so I followed up and with a former Western Australia MP, Sally Talbot, and she got back to me at 11:05 last night after I messaged her at 11 o'clock. and she described that the coercion education is up to 10 hours, there's 9 e-modules, it's already experienced doctors who are participating in this, and there's a 90% pass rate on the exam questions required. So I just wanted to add that as a way to say that, you know, coercion is taken really, really seriously in Australia. And I think there is obviously a wider issue around including the wider multidisciplinary team. So I would just wonder if Fulton McGregor would agree and acknowledge that coercion isn't taken lightly in the Western Australia model.
Fulton McGregor.
Well, I thank the member for painting the picture there of the Western Australian model, and I welcome her putting that on the record. The point I've been making in my contribution today is that coercion is a very complex area, and we've heard that across the board. And I think that my amendments today provide another safeguard in relation to this bill, and it will strengthen the integrity of the process and the confidence the public can have in it. Paul O'Kane. Yeah.
Paul O'Kane.
I'm very grateful to Fulton McGregor for giving way, and I agree with many of the amendments he's bringing, and indeed I spoke to that yesterday evening. I don't mean to conduct a debate through Fulton McGregor to Emma Harper's intervention, but well, I mean, I don't think this sort of barracking is really helpful in terms of the discussion we're trying to have on very serious issues, quite frankly. The point I'm about to make is, I'm not going to get into the debate about the Western Australian issue because I didn't raise the issue in the chamber, but what I would say is if we're talking about exam-level conditions for training, all of the things that Emma Harper has laid out, which she says she has evidence of, none of that is in this bill. We do not have a level of education for professionals of any of that level in this bill. My amendment, if not supported, which brought mandatory training for practitioners, is potentially not going to be backed. So I think I would just put that on the record. I would also say to Fulton McGregor that does he recognise as a social work professional himself the concerns that are being raised by social workers that if his amendments don't pass, the social work profession wouldn't have confidence in the legislation, not because of the content of whether you support assisted dying or not, but actually because the system would be wrong.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the member for that intervention, and I'm taking the opportunity to put what he wanted on the record. I do recognise what he said at the end there. I'm going to come to that. Without the safeguards that are being proposed here, we do risk, I believe, creating a system that overlooks the very protections that Scottish law has spent decades building up. Members, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, members may differ on the principle of assisted dying. We can hear that in the chamber, but surely we can all agree that if this law is to exist, it must operate with the highest standards of safety, scrutiny and care. When Parliament legislates a matter of life and death, we must do so with the full weight of our safeguarding system behind us. As Paul O'Kane's mentioned, in a joint briefing to MSPs circulated by the Association of Palliative Care Social Workers, the Scottish Association of Social Work and Social Work Scotland, they stated without support for Amendment 171, the bill would not reach a minimum safe threshold from a social work perspective and would be unsafe for the people of Scotland. In addition to this, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Social Services Council, 2 minutes, Marie Allison, has specifically said that Amendment 171 is the most direct way to ensure that the bill aligns with existing safeguarding frameworks and avoids preventable harm. Ross Greer.
Ross Greer.
For taking the intervention. Just on a point of clarification, because I sympathise with the broad desire that it has for safeguards here. My reading of the amendment would require a referral even if the patient confirms that they in fact do not have a social worker. So I'm not sure about the operability of it, particularly given it would require the Council to return that information within what's described as a reasonable period that would be set by ministers. Given that local government in Scotland is not famous for smooth and rapid bureaucratic processes, I'm concerned about the operability there, particularly if this would apply to every single patient, even those who do not have a social worker. Could you clarify on that?
Fulton McGregor.
Thank the member for that intervention. Happy to clarify that, and we actually think that will be the majority of cases where people would, where the consultant would be making a check with social work, and it would be a simple check of the records if that person was known, if there were any safeguarding concerns. So he raises that point, and I think he's right to raise that. We don't see that as a concern, and I think it's as all the social work agencies have told us, it's something that they feel that they can easily manage within their current systems. So, to now finally conclude, Presiding Officer, for the reasons that I've given, I urge colleagues across the chamber, Whether you're for or against this bill, to consider these arguments today, and please vote for my Amendment 171 and 306, which is a consequential amendment, and I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Audrey Nicholl to speak to Amendment 173 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much. And before I speak to my amendment, can I just say I fully support Fulton McGregor's Amendment 171. I think it's a very practical provision, and it shows the intersect between issues such as adult support protection, adults with incapacity, and potentially the legislation that will be enacted should this bill pass. So, Presiding Officer, Amendment 173 is designed to improve transparency, accountability and robust record keeping. This amendment introduces a mandatory requirement for registered medical practitioners carrying out assessments under Section 6 to prepare and retain a comprehensive written record of the assessment process. It covers all inquiries made of other professionals, discussions with the person being assessed, explanations provided regarding diagnosis, prognosis, treatment options, palliative care and the nature of any substance that might be provided, as well as advice given, referrals made and the clinical reasoning for decisions, including any instances where inquiries or referrals were not completed. There is a high prevalence of people choosing to die because they feel they are a burden on others. For example, in Oregon and Canada, close to 50% of people cite this as one of their main reasons for taking their life early under assisted dying provisions. Now, this raises, in my view, serious questions about the prevalence of coercion. There are also issues like the postcode lottery of palliative care, with some having excellent care from the point of need and others receiving too little, too late. So given factors like this, I think it is incumbent upon us to ensure robust information is recorded, to ensure the potential reasons driving an assisted death have been discussed fully, all possible help is provided to ensure someone is not driven to take their life when they otherwise would not consider it, and that this doesn't become a tick box exercise. Now, we've heard evidence from abroad that what is called doctor shopping, where patients are turned down for assisted death as they are not deemed to qualify by doctors who know them and their conditions well, but they keep reapplying to different doctors until they find someone who liberally applies the eligibility criteria, for example, approving a disabled person with many comorbidities. Now, this may explain why in places where the law has not technically expanded beyond the terminal illness eligibility criteria, non-terminal people have nonetheless been approved. So I think of Oregon, where government data shows people with conditions like arthritis and anorexia have been approved for assisted dying. An anorexia charity has found from whistleblowing doctors across the US at least 60 confirmed cases of people struggling with anorexia, mainly young women, being given drugs to end their lives under assisted dying laws. And I'll take the intervention from Claire Hockey.
Claire Hockey.
I thank Audrey Nicholl for taking my intervention, and I'm listening very carefully to what she's saying. But does she also recognise that those jurisdictions that she's talking about, where people go doctor shopping, as she has labelled it, are not the same as our NHS, that the vast majority of access to doctors and medical care and indeed hospital care is private? Therefore, it is much easier for people to go around different medical professionals to access whatever it is that they're seeking.
Audrey Nicholl.
I thank Claire Hockey for her intervention. I think she raises a really valid point, and it is really important to set the context of the discussion in terms of different healthcare provision. So I absolutely recognise the point that she's made. Now, nobody in this chamber would want people with eating disorders or other similar vulnerable people to be given drugs on the NHS to take their lives in Scotland. So I'm certain that amendments to promote strong data collection to improve the accountability of doctors is very welcome. And I think this is a point that has been raised on more than one occasion this afternoon with regard to the huge responsibility that rests on the shoulders of two people, two medical practitioners. So in my view, detailed and comprehensive recording is extremely desirable and important in terms of supporting those professionals fulfil their role, but also with regard to accountability and transparency. And I'll take the intervention from Claire.
Carol Mockin.
For taking the intervention, and I'm very sympathetic to the point that she's making. I worked in healthcare for quite a number of years in quite a complex area, and so many of our medical professionals are really used to making these really complicated, difficult decisions. And I just wanted to put that on the record to help people understand that every day, medical practitioners are working with their patients to make these complex decisions, but allowing patients to make the decision themselves, which I think is what we are trying to get to. So I'm very sympathetic to the recording of information, but I think it's important to understand these decisions are made probably every minute within the health service.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank Carol Mockin for her intervention, and I completely agree with the comments that she's made. It is important that we strike a balance between the role of medical professionals and the role of a person in this space. But my response to that would be that that makes it all the more imperative that detailed reporting is taking place just to support that decision-making process. So just to conclude, the purpose of this amendment is to promote transparency, consistency and accountability, as I've said, in the assessment process and to ensure a clear audit trail is available for regulatory review or professional oversight. Given the instances where lack of scrutiny can allow abuse of legislation and significant failures for very vulnerable individuals, I do hope that colleagues will see why Amendment 173 is necessary and that they will support it today. And I will take Bob Doris's intervention.
Bob Doris.
Thank the member. What's been an excellent contribution. Given that my Amendment 37 was mentioned in relation to your amendment, Audrey Nicholl, I wanted to say I'm fully in support of your amendment. I think it's excellent. I think it's robust. But my question would be this. Does the member agree that it's vital that we have to collect all the data and information in actually detailed case studies if this bill was to pass in relation to give meaning to annual reports on the workability of the legislation and in the review period? This information will be essential to give any meaning whatsoever to a credible review of this bill should it pass.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank Bob Doris for giving way, and I think the simple answer is yes. Case study review is a critical part of the overall function that we need to undertake with regard to the operation of any legislation, and particularly in this context of essentially public protection. So I would fully endorse and agree with the points that Bob Doris has made. And on that, I will move or ask members to support Amendment 173. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Alistair Allen to speak to Amendment 176 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will, as you say, be speaking to my amendments 176, 179 and 188. Now, normally you will hear me urging the NHS to do more of its work online to avoid unnecessary and gruelling travel for patients in the Highlands and Islands. And I appreciate the points that Mr MacArthur makes, who I know will make the same case regularly. However, I believe the matter we are discussing today really is in a different category. Whatever members' views are on the merits of this bill, I hope we can agree that a person should not be put in a position where they make any decision of this kind via Zoom about ending their life. And as for the point that I think has been alluded to at times about allowing for flexibility, I honestly cannot see circumstances, and forgive me if I am ignorant in this, I cannot see circumstances in which a doctor should not make the effort to visit the patient in these circumstances. So I do have doubts about whether this bill allows enough time for proper face-to-face consultations, particularly for the first and second declarations that the legislation sets out. But regardless on your views on that, I'll give way.
I thank the member for giving way. I did wonder about how this would work in rural areas, but the member himself obviously represents quite a rural and spread-out constituency. Does he still think it would be okay for in-person visits?
Well, I honestly don't think that the protections should be less in rural areas than they are in urban areas. I think the obligation on doctors in these circumstances to visit the patient seems to me to be pretty basic and should apply throughout the country. The bill presently seems to assume that consultations can be done remotely, or at least the bill does not seem to rule that out throughout the process. Now, identifying coercion over video must be extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult, often impossible, I would judge. Professionals cannot reliably see the subtle cues, hesitations or dynamics that indicate that someone is under pressure. This is not a theoretical concern. In a remote meeting, it is not even necessarily apparent to all participants who else is in the room or what is being said off camera, as Mr Greer, I think, pointed out. So frankly, regardless of whether a patient is in a city or on an island, then the professionals involved, I give way to Daniel Johnson.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving me, and I think he makes an excellent point about the subtleties and the cues regarding detecting coercion. But I also wonder if he might reflect that the communication is in the other direction, in terms of the information the patient might seek, the communication with the doctor as they make a very difficult decision, and that, so both in terms of detecting coercion, but actually just in terms of the patient themselves, because nobody makes a decision by themselves. We are social beings, and actually making sure that is a quality interaction is absolutely vital for the patient as well as for the doctor.
Alistair Allen.
I agree with that. Anyone who has attempted to ask a question in a hybrid meeting will probably be able to readily identify with what the member has just said. So, in my view, to sum up, I believe, yes.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. I thank the member for taking the intervention. So I would very much like to support Dr Allen's amendments. I just have a question of clarification, because they refer to the assessments under Section 6 and 7. So under Section 7, that requires the coordinating medical practitioner not just to conduct assessments with the patient, but to make inquiries with other professionals. Now, my reading of the section it's inserted into, in 8, would be that this is only in reference to the assessment between the medical professional and the patient. It wouldn't require them to consult other professionals in person. But could he just clarify that? If that is indeed his intention, I would certainly be very keen to support both of these amendments.
Alistair Allen.
That would be my understanding of the way the amendments are written. And in my view, that means that we are ensuring that at least the crucial decisions are made with everyone in the same actual rather than virtual room. And I therefore ask members to back my 3 amendments.
Thank you. I now call Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 184 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will limit my comments to the amendments that are in my name. Amendment 184 concerns an issue that sits at the very centre of the debate that Parliament has been having about this bill, and what we have been hearing over the last few minutes from different members. Mr MacArthur and others throughout the scrutiny of this bill have repeatedly given assurances that legislation will contain robust protections for vulnerable people. Supporters of the bill have pointed to the role of 2 doctors, the coordinating practitioner and the independent practitioner, as one of the key safeguards within the system. If those medical assessments are to play such a critical role, then it is essential that the outcomes of these assessments are clear, transparent and properly recorded, particularly where a doctor concludes that the criteria set out in the bill have not been met. Amendment 184 therefore introduces a straightforward, but I believe an important requirement. Where either the coordinating registered medical practitioner or the independent registered medical practitioner carries out the assessment and is not satisfied that the individual meets the conditions set out in the bill, whether because the person is not terminally ill, is not eligible under the legislation, or because they are concerned that the declaration may have not been made voluntarily, the practitioner must make a formal statement explaining that conclusion. The statement must set out the reasons why the practitioner was not satisfied, be signed and dated, and shared with the individual concerned. In other words, where a doctor determines that the legal tests in the bill have not been met, the decision should be clearly documented and properly communicated. However, the amendment goes further than that because it also addresses an important practical concern. Because without such a safeguard, there is a risk that the individual who has been assessed and found not to meet the criteria could simply seek another practitioner and begin the process again immediately. Now, I accept the intervention from Claire Hockey a few moments ago that most of this, as the bill stands, will be done within NHS Scotland. However, as the bill stands, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but my understanding as the bill stands, there is provision for those within private business to set up such a service. So you could end up in a situation where I go and see my GP, the GP does the assessment and says, no, you don't meet the criteria, and then I simply go to maybe a private company in another part of Scotland or in the same part that I live in, and they would start the process and may come to a different conclusion. And that raises the possibility of what we have heard already as doctor shopping, where someone continues to seek further assessments until they eventually find a practitioner willing to reach a different conclusion. And I do worry that for those with certain conditions, that may be something they will do. I am sure all of us have our preferred doctor. I know that I have my own favourite GP within my practice. I know that when in previous times I've had to go for surgery, I've maybe hoped for a certain consultant over another. That is human nature. But in the context of this bill, we must prevent situations where an individual refused an assisted death by one doctor doesn't simply go on until we find someone else. Given the seriousness and the point of this bill, I do not believe that such a situation, can I just, 1 second, I could provide the robust safeguards that the Parliament have been told the bill will contain. Amendment 184 therefore introduces a clear provision where a practitioner records that they are not satisfied for legal criteria. No further assessment under the bill may take place for a period of 12 months. And I give way.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, that's absolutely, because that's the point I wanted to come in. And I appreciate that Mr Balfour lodged his amendment before we agreed to insert a 6-month diagnosis period, but I just wonder how he can now reconcile a 12-month period for reassessment when we have now accepted that there should be a 6-month diagnosis in terms of when it's likely a person will die.
Jerry Balfour.
I'm grateful to the member for that. What we agreed last night was within the realms of 6 months. My older brother is getting tired of me telling this story, but my older brother he just retired as a GP. A few years ago, a person walked into his surgery with a very serious condition. The person said to my older brother, "How long do you think I have to left?" And he said, "Well, you won't see Christmas," and it was late summer. I'm pleased to say that person is still alive and playing golf today. So there will be situations where, even with under a 6-month rule, people survive longer than that, and that's why I think we still need the 12-month rule there. Mr Johnson, Mr Johnson.
Daniel Johnson.
Very grateful to the member for giving way. And I understand the intent behind this, and indeed, in some ways, it's similar to the amendments that I've put forward in my name. But I do worry that the 12-month stipulation is overly burdensome, particularly because, while he's correct, the 6-month rule is not definitive. As I presented, it was a yardstick. But nonetheless, we are dealing with people who are probably looking at months to live. And just as he is right that we don't want dog shopping, at the same time, Doctors' opinions are fallible. And indeed, I think it's not unreasonable to necessarily want a second issue. And would he note that my amendments would require, if a subsequent decision was made contrary to a previous decision, that would need to be explained? Might that be a compromise that's acceptable to the member?
Jeremy Balfour.
I do fully accept that doctors get it wrong on different occasions. I think what still concerns me is that you could still end up, without the 12-month rule, individuals shopping around until they find somebody who agrees with them. I'll give way to Lawrence Slater.
Lawrence Slater.
Thank you. I am slightly horrified by the scenarios that the member is I think, probably maybe inadvertently coming into place. Imagine you are dying, you are suffering so badly, even with excellent care, that you and you're maybe at risk of losing your capacity at some unknown time because you are so very, very ill. But you don't want to take months to die slowly. You don't want to die gasping at an unknown time. You want to do it peacefully and at your own time. But maybe you don't vibe with the first doctor you talk to. Maybe you feel you got off on the wrong foot with that doctor. But you are still desperate. You are still weeks away, maybe just a few months away, and yet you are now being told that choice is taken away from you because you didn't kind of get off on the right foot with that right doctor. Of course, you should be allowed to go and talk to a different doctor and see if you can have a refresh of that conversation. The second doctor or third doctor you talk to has the same level of qualifications, and they may understand your situation better.
Jeremy Balfour.
I think what Lawrence Slater is advocating, find the doctor you want until you get the decision you want. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a terminal condition, it doesn't matter whether you've got capacity, any of that, just keep going until you find the doctor that gives you what you want. Because, as Lawrence Slater said, there are Doctor 2, Doctor 3, Doctor 4, Doctor 5. That is just simply opening the system, and it's not what I don't think is Parliament. Let's see what the record says at the end of the day.
Is that a point of order?
President, I don't want to delay us longer, but I do want to make a couple more points. I do want to say, though, back to Mr Johnson. Can I just finish this point? I do want to go back to Mr Johnson's point and say that if members were not willing to support my amendments, then I would agree that he at least takes us further down the road than is in the bill at the moment. I would hope that members would support his ones if he can't bring mine. I'll take Mr Doris's intervention.
Bob Doris.
Just incredibly briefly, Mr Balfour, just after your exchange with Ms Slater, can I just put on the record, I'm sure the Chamber will agree, irrespective of our views in relation to this bill, I respect the professional of doctors, irrespective of whether they get off on the wrong foot or otherwise. Doctors are professional and they will simply do their job.
Jeremy Balfour.
As always, Mr Doris is absolutely right. Well, not always, but on this case he is. And I'm glad, as he would say, we've put that on the record. If I could move briefly, to Amendment 196, what complements this by introducing additional clarity, notification requirements and oversight mechanism. It requires the coordinating registered medical practitioner to notify all assessors, witnesses, proxies and legally authorised representatives within 24 hours of any statement being made. This ensures that professionals involved inform promptly, reducing the risk of miscommunication or oversight. Importantly, Amendment 196 provides a formal pathway for assessors to record any concerns about eligibility in the individual's medical records. Where disagreements arise, no further action can proceed until the matter is reviewed by an independent panel comprising a medical practitioner with expertise in end-of-life care, a legally qualified professional and an officer specialising in the end-of-life decision-making. The panel will provide written determination within 14 days. Taken together, I believe Amendments 184, 196 and 307 safeguard vulnerable adults, reinforce professional accountability and provide a structured, transparent framework for resolving disagreements. They ensure the refusal are respected, that professional concerns are independently reviewed and the process is both rigorous and consistent, and I ask members to support them when they are moved.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I now call on Sue Webber to speak to Amendment 91 and other amendments of the group. Ms Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I first say thank you to my colleague Stephen Kerr, who spoke to my amendments yesterday in Group 2. So thank you very much, Stephen. This evening, or this afternoon still, yes, we are speaking to my amendments 91 and 92. And they simply seek to reinforce the safeguards earlier in the bill, and they are not here to serve as any form of obstacle. I note that the Parliament has agreed to redefine or refine the definition of terminal illness to only those expected to die within 6 months. And this is an amendment with consequence that should be reflected elsewhere in the bill. At the second declaration, it's imperative that the doctor once again considers that prognosis. And we've heard from colleagues just how arbitrary that 6-month timescale can be. And we all have friends and family members who have outlived the timeframe that doctors have given them. Indeed, Esther Ranson, who's campaigned vigorously for the similar bill to pass in England, had a much longer life due to new treatments becoming available. And Scott Murray, Emeritus Professor of Palliative Care here at Edinburgh University, in correspondence with MSPs, pointed out that accuracy rates in prognosis were as low as 23%. Writing in the Times, he said, "While those facing death cannot access the high quality of palliative care they need, such legislation risks becoming a simple and dangerous cost-saving measure." Chilling words from those who are working on the front lines of our health service. And given that prognosis is so flawed and inaccurate, as we heard earlier, it's vital that at a second declaration a further assessment is made. If it is found that the individual is doing better, that treatment is working, or that palliative care is giving a better quality of life, then the process should be halted and referred to a panel. If prognosis has changed, there must be a mechanism to deal with it. We must ensure that people are not able to doctor shop, as we've just heard, and can be given a decision quickly and clearly. Colleagues, you can just see how complicated all of this is. And the member in charge is keen for you to believe that this is the simplest thing in the world. Other countries have done it easily, and that there is nothing controversial in the bill. It is simply not the case. Every time you scratch the surface of this bill, you open another load of questions and issues. What happens if the prognosis at second declaration is different from the first? What are the options for the doctor and the patient? There is no panel to adjudicate on decisions, such as the bill in Westminster. This is a flawed bill. We can tighten one bit, but that just exposes issues elsewhere. I won't thank you, Ms Slater. By introducing a 6-month prognosis, there is no mechanism for solving the issue if that prognosis changes at the second declaration. So even this small, simple amendment throws up a huge number of issues about coercion, benefit, involvement of professionals, and what happens if other doctors' opinion is different from the first. None of these situations are rare, and none of them are unusual. I am moving these amendments to try and tighten up just one small flaw, but by doing that we open up other issues. Presiding Officer, the second declaration should and must be an assessment to see if anything has changed since the first declaration, and it should and must be recorded properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Webber. I now call on Liz Smith to speak to Amendment 197 and other amendments of the group. Ms Smith.
Thank you. Amendment 197 addresses what is a practical but nonetheless very important gap in the bill, namely what happens when a cancellation is not recorded. The legislation requires that a cancellation of a first or second declaration be recorded within 7 days, but the bill as drafted is silent on the consequences if that does not happen. So in legislation of this complexity and sensitivity, that silence could be taken as uncertainty. If the legislation is to proceed, then the law must be absolutely clear about the responsibilities and about what happens when these responsibilities are not met. This amendment therefore introduces a clear mechanism of accountability. If a cancellation is not recorded within the required 7-day period, the responsible medical practitioner must face professional accountability. And I heard what Mr MacArthur said regarding this amendment, but I know from my work in this Parliament that sadly there are times when medical practitioners and their oversight are not always entirely professional in their activities. So Amendment 197 would require them to issue a written apology to the adult for any distress that's caused and confirm in writing that the cancellation has now been properly recorded. That requirement matters because a recording of a cancellation is not merely an administrative step. A cancellation represents a fundamental change of an individual's decision. And if that change is not properly recorded, the system risks proceeding on the basis of information that is simply wrong. Colleagues should consider the uncertainty that could arise if that cancellation is made and not formally recorded is a part of a real problem. Who is responsible? What safeguards are triggered? How do we ensure that the individual changed wishes are respected? Because the bill as it stands does not answer these questions with sufficient clarity. So Amendment 197 therefore provides that clarity. It reinforces the expectation that decision-making in this process must be recorded accurately and promptly, and it ensures that there are consequences if that does not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Smith. I now call Pam Duncan-Clancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I can see again that amendments in this group seek to try to remove some of the possibility, for example, of improper motives influencing the process, and some of the amendments seek to include additional steps on assessment. Reporting and recording all of this is, of course, crucial, and I understand the motivation and intentions of amendments that do that. But I think it is important to note that many of the amendments seek to ensure people are asked about support, that conversations are had and recorded, crucial though all of that is, but none of them guarantee that such support will be provided. And I just wanted to put a few points on the record about that. Amendments that don't deliver the additional support needed, so record the information and explore it, but don't fundamentally deliver it, don't address the unmet needs or health inequalities that exist throughout life or indeed at the end of life. Amendments here that require referrals to others are helpful, particularly the ones around young people. I know many disabled people have said that so hard that it is growing up with a disability that they would have considered using this option were it available. So these amendments are really important. But we must also know that referrals don't always get actioned, wait lists are long, and they don't always result in the delivery of support. And so I think we have to remember that in the context of what we're being asked to do. Finally, Presiding Officer, perhaps my biggest concern here is that none of the amendments will address the fact that people may have needed support, social care or otherwise throughout their lives, but that it hasn't been there, and that the absence of that, indeed the relentless fight for it that many people can face, could lead them to feeling like not going on is an attractive option. So I've tried to bring amendments on this particular issue at stage 2 that would have said things like social care and support had to be available, accessible and affordable, and that packages should be in place to support, for example, disabled people to lead an independent life before this bill comes in, to try and address this concern. But I was told they were out of scope, and I understand that actually. But I guess that's the point. We can't address the risks in this bill, that other factors that motivate the choice to end a life through assessment within this bill. And for that reason, while many of the amendments in this group seek to improve the process, and I recognise that and the motivation behind them, to genuinely protect people, we must ensure not only that support is discussed or signposted, but that people are able to access that support that they need to live before we consider making it easier for them to choose to die. And we're not able to do that, I don't see, in these amendments, or indeed any of the amendments that we will debate over the coming days. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Duncan-Clancy. I call Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, there are many, many amendments in this group with which I agree and some I disagree with, but mercifully I'm only going to speak to one, and that is Amendment 154 in the name of Douglas Ross, which I support, and that's got nothing to do with his proxy declaration for independence yesterday. I think this is very important because I want to put on the record as a firm supporter of this bill that it's not an either-or for me. It's not end-of-life assistance or palliative care. It's both. And what is appropriate to the individual. So I very much welcome nailing this down, and I'll just quote what you say, what the member says. When assessing a declaration, the doctor must, mandatory, great, discuss available palliative care options. Excellent, because we know palliative care comes in many forms, not necessarily the hospice or the hospital, it could be at home, Macmillan nurses, there are lots of ways it can be delivered to the individual and at different times. Understands, ensure the person understands them and formally record that recent discussion that you've had with the patient. I absolutely support that, and I do hope, my hope, and you'll be very brief, is that if this bill passes, I want to see a huge improvement in palliative care. So it's not a case of somebody thinking palliative care is not available or it's not there or whatever, it's not suitable for me, therefore this is what I must do. I want both choices. I want both choices for myself and for everybody else. So for probably the first and last time, Mr Ross, I support you.
And I call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I am going to keep this brief. This is the first time I've spoken in these proceedings to date, although I have been following them intently. And like many members, I suspect we're trying to do the right thing, particularly with free votes on these amendments. It's been an exercise and a half to get your head around them, but I have listened intently to all of them, and there are a couple today which I did lose some sleep over last night. The amendments from Daniel Johnson and Alistair Allen around the issue of in-person interactions, and I think this is maybe an issue that other members have been wrestling with through some conversations I've been having this past 24 hours. At the moment, unfortunately, I feel like some members are in an insidious position between the status quo, or the apparent status quo of the legislation as drafted, which means that in theory all interactions with both medical practitioners could be virtually, although that is a very unlikely scenario. On paper it could be, and that the only physical or face-to-face interaction some would have is at the point of the administration of the substance. I personally am not comfortable with that. I don't think that's a position that any patient would want to be in either. But the options that are being presented seem to be at the other end of that spectrum, which forces into a position where all interactions must be in person, which thus removes, I think, as Mr MacArthur pointed out, any flexibility to allow for any scenario where a patient might be suitable for at least one or more of those interactions to be virtual or in some other method. And that's put many of us in a difficult position, I think, because I'm keen to support Mr Johnson's and Mr Allen's amendments, which put on the face of the legislation that there must be some physical interaction between a patient and a doctor. Because I think in normal circumstances, particularly as many of us that lived through the COVID years of this Parliament, we accepted new ways of doing things in healthcare. But when it comes to this, when it comes to the issue of life and death and the signing off of the Schedule 2 statements that these doctors have to make, my gut feeling is that that is something that a doctor could only and should only do once he has sat with that patient in person and looked them in the eyes. But it should also allow for flexibility as well. So I think, to get ourselves out of this perhaps conundrum that some of us find ourselves in when it comes to voting on the amendments, in summing up from the Cabinet Secretary, I know the Government has taken a neutral position on the majority of the amendments, and that's helpful in some cases. But in this, is this the sort of thing that could be resolved in the guidance that is issued to practitioners or not? And I guess I'm looking for some comfort and reassurance in that, because it feels to me that may be a way out of this conundrum. If that is not a reassurance that can be given robustly or honestly and directly by the Health Secretary, that's not a criticism in advance, I will finish in a second, then I would be minded to support the amendments which put on the face of the bill the physicality element. So I'll perhaps just leave it at that. But I wanted to raise these issues because it is one that I have wrestled with personally, and I know others might have done the same. Because I think, as I said at the beginning of my opening comments, is we do want to get it right, no matter what side of this bill you will land on. And like many of us, we're trying to approach these amendments on an amendment-by-amendment basis to get them right for the patients who may benefit from this if the bill passes. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Green. And I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, once again, before I set out the Government's position on amendments within this group, I do not have any comment to make on colleagues' contributions, the merits of them, nor indeed the organisations, in some cases, who have asked for them to be raised. I have heard many contributions in this group with compelling cases to make. I cannot comment on them. I must set out the potential implications so that colleagues can take an informed position. And of the amendments that I am referencing in this group, most are referenced regarding deliverability, practicality, or regarding potential financial implications, excepting one, which is regarding legislative competence. So, Presiding Officer, Amendment 29 has potential implications for service delivery, as it may require medical professionals to accommodate a wider range of timings and settings for provision and oversight, with associated impacts on workforce capacity, scheduling and resource planning. Amendment 31 is a necessary technical amendment which corrects an erroneous cross-reference in section 7(1)(b). In relation to Amendments 91 and 92, the addition of a further layer of assessment would have financial and resource implications for the NHS. On Amendment 95, the introduction of new requirements for recording and sharing information relating to assessments could raise deliverability issues around information flows, duplication of records and a need for clarity around who can access or use recorded data. Further consideration would need to be given regarding alignment with existing legislation, particularly the Adult Support and Protection Scotland Act 2007. Amendments 153, 176, 179 and 188 could lead to some issues around accessibility of assisted dying, particularly for those living in rural and island communities where there may be fewer registered medical practitioners who are available and willing to be involved in the provision of assisted dying, and where there is potentially greater reliance on digital healthcare. Amendment 157, requiring the assessing registered medical practitioners to make inquiries of at least one health, social work or social care professional, would have clear resource implications that would have to be considered. In relation to Amendments 161 and 163, the requirement for referral will be costly and resource intensive, as it would result in both the coordinating and independent registered medical practitioners having to make these referrals, regardless of their own clinical judgment and whether or not they feel that they require a second opinion. These amendments could require individuals who are seeking assistance to undergo potentially 6 separate assessments, given that both the initial 2 assessments would be required, as well as the coordinating and independent registered medical practitioners each having to make these 2 referrals. It is not clear what would happen in a circumstance where the coordinating and independent registered medical practitioners held the relevant experience, nor whether these referrals could be made to the same registered medical practitioner holding the relevant experience. On Amendment 164, this may raise equalities issues on the basis of a difference of treatment dependent on age. In addition, from a deliverability perspective, consideration must be given to the availability of suitably qualified social work and psychiatry professionals and the potential impact on assessment timescales and service capacity. Similarly, Amendment 170 may raise equalities issues on the basis of a difference of treatment dependent on age. The amendment may also raise issues of legislative competence in providing for regulations that include provision about training, qualifications, experience of the practitioner making the referral. From a deliverability perspective, Amendment 170 may raise concerns about service capacity, consistency of application and timely access to appropriate support. Several of the indicators listed may be common among this age group and could place additional pressure on social work and mental health services, with implications for capacity, prioritisation and waiting times. There are also challenges associated with interpretation and consistent application of the indicators. The effectiveness of the amendment would further The effectiveness of the amendment would further depend on the availability of clear referral pathways and timely access to appropriate services. Otherwise, it could potentially impact upon access to assisted dying for those aged 25 years of age, under 25 years of age. From a technical perspective, it is also not clear if it was the intention of that provision would relate to the practitioner making the referral rather than the practitioner receiving it. I give way to Mr Hepburn.
Jimmy Hepburn.
I've been trying to telepathically communicate with Mr Green to see if he would make the intervention, but he hasn't, so I make it. It's on the point that he raised. I'm inclined to believe that the assessments should be face-to-face as well, but I am taken with the points around how that could be inflexible in some circumstances, and the Cabinet Secretary has laid out some of the practical issues there. I just wonder, and I appreciate it might be difficult because I completely recognise the Government is neutral, but is there any comment on the point that Mr Green has raised around whether or not such circumstances could be accounted for in guidance?
That would need to be considered upon the implementation of the bill, if it is passed. I cannot give any further commentary as to whether it would or it should, because the Government is neutral on the bill and we would need to consider that at point of implementation. So I'm afraid I can't provide any further assurance or commentary for Mr Hepburn or Mr Green, for that matter, than what I'm able to set out at the moment. Amendment 171 may present operational challenges, raising questions about local authority capacity and alignment with existing social work and safeguarding frameworks. In practice, there is no single consolidated system through which local authorities can readily confirm an individual's status across the different legal frameworks referred to. Responding to such requests may therefore require additional checks across multiple services, potentially increasing administrative burdens and affecting the timeliness of responses. The mandatory referral to a registered social worker where a statement indicates that a person is deemed unable to protect their own interests or where undue influence is identified risks conflating existing statutory safeguarding processes with a broader, non-specific referral requirement. This may result in duplication of existing assessments or referrals being made in circumstances where appropriate support or protections are already in place. There are potential challenges around interpretation and consistency of concepts, such as being deemed unable to protect their own interests. This could lead to variability in how local authority statements are produced and how practitioners interpret them. In relation to Amendment 173, it is not clear how or where these records are to be maintained. The reference to any regulatory or oversight body exercising statutory functions under the bill or other related legislation is unclear, and so the purpose of this record keeping is also not clear. If it is intended that the records should be used by Public Health Scotland for their duties under Section 24, it is not clear that the information to be recorded and retained would all be necessary. If it is to be used to support investigations into any offences or wrongdoing under the Act, the provision does not seem to support a professional regulator to access information, as they would not be exercising statutory functions under the bill or arguably under any related legislation. Without having clarity on the purpose of the record keeping, it would not be possible to say whether 10 years is a suitable period of retention. On Amendments 183, 183A, 185 and 195, the requirement for additional accompanying statements, particularly where petitioners must explain divergence from an earlier assessment, may add to the administrative burden. There are also concerns that mandating detailed written justifications could deter clinician participation, lengthen processes and duplicate information already required elsewhere in the bill and supporting guidance. Amendment 184 provides that, should someone be found to be ineligible to request an assisted death, they could not undergo further assessment until a period of 12 months has lapsed. This could result in a person who is otherwise lawfully eligible to be assisted to die being prevented from accessing an assisted death. On Amendment 186, setting up a panel would be likely to have major financial implications. I've already spoken about Amendment 183 and 193 in Group 4 as it relates to Amendment 174 in that group. Taken together, these amendments could add procedural complexity and delay without clear evidence that they would improve outcomes beyond the safeguards already provided in the bill. On Amendment 196, setting up a panel would likely have major financial implications. Amendment 197 may give rise to issues of legislative competence insofar as it may relate to the G2 reservation of regulation of health professions. From a delivery perspective, it is also not clear how this is to be monitored or enforced. It is also very prescriptive in assuming the reaction of the adult involved. For the remaining amendments in this group, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has no comment other than technical points to be found in the commentary.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Brian Whittle to... Point of order, Michael Mara.
President Officer, briefly, I wish to correct the record relating to my contribution in these proceedings yesterday on the mandatory training for participation in assisted dying by a physician in Victoria, Australia. Our colleague Emma Harper set out the full mandatory training requirements for participation in assisted dying. My own contribution yesterday related specifically to training for identification of coercion. The video that must be watched by candidates is not 2 minutes, as I stated. It is 2 minutes and 22 seconds, and I hope that corrects the record.
Thank you, Mr Barrett. That will be duly noted on the record. And I now call Brian Whittle to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 150. Mr Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's a rather large group of amendments, and you'll be pleased to hear I won't speak to every single one of them. But as you can imagine, when we're discussing about assessments and support for terminally ill adults. Some of the contributions, or most of the contributions from across this chamber, have been considered and well made. We're talking about initially about the impact of social care and palliative care as an option. Well, I say it's not going to be an option. It has to be offered, and I'm very pleased that everybody is in agreement, because in reality we cannot separate out access to palliative care and social care from assisted dying. I was very interested to Mona Mackay's intervention there around what's happened in other jurisdictions, as we had evidence in the Health and Social Care Committee around there are jurisdictions where when assisted dying has been implemented, there has been an improvement in the palliative care in those areas. However, improvement is not enough. It has to be consistent, and it has to be at a level before you can consider assisted dying, which is why I was really pleased to hear my colleague Douglas Ross bring forward his Amendment 154 and once again remind us that choice has to be real. It has to be a real choice for everybody, irrespective of background or personal circumstance. I heard the contributions from Bob Doris, Jackie Bailey, Daniel Johnson, Miles Briggs and Fulton McGregor, which have brought forward amendments that have been amended from Stage 2, which at Stage 2 were eminently sensible in the direction they were going, and have been amended once again to fit the bill. And I'm very pleased that they have been, I'll not go through them all, but they have my support. I think Paula Kane's amendment making it mandatory to seek the appropriate advice, I think again is a crucial amendment, and I would ask that the Chamber support that. And the one I really want to speak to is my Amendment 155. I think, once again, once the request for assisted dying has been made, I think it is absolutely imperative that the professional judgment comes from the two healthcare professionals has to be done independently. It must be done independently, because not only does that ensure that judgment, I think it also, I would imagine, give a certain amount of comfort to the medical professionals themselves in making such a huge decision. And finally, Deputy Presiding Officer, I have to say, and I don't say this lightly, I think the Scottish Government are being particularly unhelpful in this as this goes through goes through Stage 3. Because they are declining to give us any kind of steer at all into what potentially could be legal or otherwise. And the last bit I would say, I was interested in Stephen Kerr and Michael Mara's discussion around the impact in the finances of the government. And to Michael Mara's point, there is nothing within the budget that improves investment in palliative care. And we're working here on a Stage 3 bill without a financial memorandum that's actually been properly costed and agreed. So if this bill passes, it will be incumbent on the government to ensure that the finances are available to deliver that palliative care that's necessary. And if we can't deliver that palliative care that's necessary, we'll be sitting with a bill that's passed that will be undeliverable. I move Amendment 150 in my name.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. The question is that Amendment 150 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 22 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 150. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament... Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Sorry, I call Amendment 23 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with Amendment 150. Bob Doris to move or not move?
Move.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 151 in the name of Paul O'Kane, already debated with Amendment 144. I remind members that if Amendment 151 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 24 by way of preemption. Paul O'Kane to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 151 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Anna Sarwar. Could Mr Sarwar put his microphone on, please? Could you put his card in, please? Mr Sarwar.
I apologise for delaying the chamber even further, Presiding Officer. My app wouldn't load. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Sarwar. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 151 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 59, no 62. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call amendment 24 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with amendment 144. Bob Doris, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament has not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 24 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 68, no 50. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 152 in the name of Paul O'Kane, already debated with amendment 144. I remind members that if amendment 152 is agreed to, I cannot call amendment 25 by way of preemption. Paul O'Kane, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 152 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. The members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 152 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 50, no 73. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 25 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with amendment 144. Bob Doris, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament has not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 25 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 70, no 49. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 153 in the name of Daniel Johnson, already debated with amendment 150. Daniel Johnson, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 153 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 153 in the name of Daniel Johnson is yes 82, no 40. There were 2 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 154 in the name of Douglas Ross, already debated with amendment 150. Douglas Ross, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding
Move. The question is that amendment 154 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast the vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 154 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 97, no 22. There were 5 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 5 in the name of Daniel Johnson, ready to debate with amendment 3. Daniel Johnson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 88 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with amendment 3. I remind members that if amendment 88 is agreed to, I cannot call amendment 6 by way of preemption. Liam MacArthur, to move or not move? Moved. The question is that amendment 88 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 88 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 86, no 28. There were 10 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. And as a result of that, I cannot then call Amendment 6 in the name of Daniel Johnston by way of preemption. So I now call Amendment 155 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 150. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 155 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 155 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 15, no 101. There were 6 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 156 in the name of Paul O'Kane, already debated with Amendment 3. Paul O'Kane to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 156 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 156 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 51, no 68. There were 2 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 89 in the name of Liam MacArthur, ready to debate with Amendment 3. Liam MacArthur to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 89 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 89 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 87, no 27. There were 9 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 157 in the name of Paul O'Kane, already debated with amendment 150. Paul O'Kane to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 157 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 157 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 56, no 63. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 26 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with amendment 150. Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
Move.
Move. The question is that amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed to amendment 26. I call amendment 27 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with amendment 144. Bob Doris to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 27 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 27 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 85, no 38. There was 1 abstention. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 158 in the name of Paul O'Kane, already debated with amendment 144. Paul O'Kane to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 158 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 158 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 65, no 56. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 28 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with amendment 150. Bob Doris to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 28 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 90, no 29. There were 5 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I now call amendment 159 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 149. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Move. The question is that amendment 159 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 159 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 61, no 56. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I now call amendment 29 in the name of Liam MacArthur, ready debated with amendment 150. Liam MacArthur to move or not move? Move. The question is that amendment 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. The members should cast the vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 29 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 59, no 60. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 30 in the name of Liam MacArthur, ready debated with amendment 150. Liam MacArthur to move or not move? Moved. The question is that amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 30 in the name of Liam MacArthur is yes 119, no 2. There were 3 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 31 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with amendment 150. Liam MacArthur to move or not move? Moved. The question is that amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. No. Was he sure? Was he no? It was no. Well, that's helpful. It would be helpful, to be honest, if members could actually indicate their preferences, because it's not always, because of the sound in the auditorium chamber, easy to hear. So there will be a division, and members should cast a vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Graham Day.
Officer, the vote is yes.
Thank you, Mr Day. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 31 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 123, No, 1. There was 1 abstention. The amendment is therefore... Sorry, we'll withdraw that and we'll get back to the result in a minute. In the meantime, do I have a point of order?
No. It's Bob Doris.
No, it's my fault.
Was she? Yeah, she was wrong.
Right, well, I can assure Mr Carnott it was indeed Amendment 31. However, it was, in fact, Mr MacArthur and not Mr Doris. So we've got there in the end. And the result, to repeat, is yes at 123, no 1. There was 1 abstention. The amendment is therefore agreed. I now call Amendment 32 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with Amendment 150. Bob Doris, to move or not move?
Thank you for that clarity. Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 32 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 87, no 33. There were 5 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 160 in the name of Bob Doris, already debated with Amendment 144. Bob Doris, to move or not move?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 160 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 160 in the name of Bob Doris is yes 80, no 42. There were 2 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I would advise at this stage that we will now proceed to have a comfort break of 20 minutes. Members should return promptly at just before 18:41. Thank you.